Oh, amazing. Okay. So, thanks very much for staying. I'm surprised to see so many of you still here, and I really appreciate it. I was expecting there would be like 5 of us, and we'd be sitting around having beers or something, but maybe later. So, let me just dive right in. I will reassure you that it's going to be fairly short, that it's going to be fairly light, and there will be lots of pictures, so you can relax a bit. So first of all, just to step back thinking about the instruments that go into this. Just looking over all the science that was presented and all the things we're going to do, I just wanted to step back and look at where we are, because it's such an amazing place. You know, I never really thought we would get here. When you look at the sensitivity we've got, the continuous frequency coverage from like 100 megahertz to 100 gigahertz that we're talking about, something, I mean, that's been emphasized, but I think the points that Robert Brown and others have been making about the spatial scales that are recovered in a single observation are also a really important thing to mention. We're talking about a range of spatial scales from sort of milliarc seconds to almost degrees in a single observation, recovering all those scales at once with an interferometer, which is just astonishing. So instead of going A, B, C, D configuration as I'm used to in the VLA, or waiting for ALMA to move around if you're an ALMA person, we're going to be getting all of that at once for both of the instruments, which is just, it's incredible. And to me, the great thing about this is sort of reflected in this conference, that you'll be able to pick your instrument to match your science rather than trying to fit your science in around the instrument, which is a big change. And I think this meeting of these two communities is just the start of that. I'm sure that in the next one, we'll be having people at all sorts of wavelengths all get together. And we'll start to see the real power of this. It's going to be a real game changer just in that sociological way, I think, as well. Of course, the other amazing thing is that this does seem actually to be happening. There are a lot of people here who have been working on this, towards this for many decades. And we all owe them a really deep debt for that level of commitment and enthusiasm and persistence. And it's really amazing to look at these pictures and realize, wow, there's real stuff. You know, for SKA, there's real stuff on the ground. For NGVLA, we're getting there. There will be an antenna next year, which is pretty darn astonishing. Of course, the other thing thinking about this, what are the precursors? What led up to this? What other instruments have been noted a lot? One thing that struck me, of course, is that ALMA is casting a very long shadow. And I'd say it's casting it in a bunch of different ways. One of them is sort of what we've been talking about, which is all the science that's inspired by ALMA. When you say, gosh, we could do this, well, golly, that is so amazing and wonderful, we'll pounce on that with these new instruments, which is great. But there is also, I think, a couple sort of sociological context, historical things there. This was the first really big billion-dollar international facility, right? 3 major partners having to work together, figure it all out. That was a pain in the butt, as everyone who was involved knows. But the other amazing thing about this was that we wrote up the science case many moons ago, many moons ago, and we said it would do all these great and fantastic things and it was all going to be worth it. And it has been. We've actually done all the things that it was said that it would do, which is pretty astonishing. And that gives me a lot of hope for these new instruments too, to say, yes, we've been talking about SKA, we've been talking about, NGVLA, whatever we called it, again for many decades. And we've been saying it would do all these great things. Now it's coming, I'm hoping that I'll be around long enough to see a lot of them being done, which is just amazing and wonderful. And to me, very inspiring. Oops, that one. Of course, the other thing that surprises me in this meeting was that I still heard a few words about the VLA, which has been around quite a long time now. You'd say, getting long in the tooth, yes. Of course, it's had the upgrade, which is great. But we were still seeing scientific results for that, which are from that instrument, which are again inspiring this next generation of scientists and instrument people. And again, to me, that's a really great precedent. If you think about it, the VLA has been around for what, 50 years or so. and it's still doing great work. It's still a unique facility. Now that's a commentary on how long it takes to build these billion-dollar instruments. But we should also be thinking that we're not just building the SKA and NGVLA for the next 10 years and for the grad students in the audience. These are going to be your students and your students' students, right? These instruments, I mean, there's a design lifetime for these things of 50 years, and my expectation is that we will actually do that. And of course, these instruments have a benefit in that we've learned from the past and we're building in renewal along the way going forward. So they will keep being cutting edge and interesting instruments for decades to come, which is another sort of sobering thing, but really exciting. On the interactions front, so this is the first of these meetings I've been to where there's been an emphasis actually on the fact that there are other people on these lands where we go. We go to these, I mean, I think we've all had the experience of going to observatories and realizing what incredibly special places these telescopes are at. You go up Mauna Kea and you're just blown away, right? And that's true in different ways at places like the VLA. I'm less sure of the LOFAR sites because I haven't been to many of them. But yeah, I mean, they're always gorgeous places, amazing, unique places. And of course, those are amazing, beautiful, unique places, not just for astronomers, but for lots of other people as well. And again, I'm very hopeful now that we're starting to realize that we should be talking to the local folks and sort of putting ourselves inside the communities that we affect through these big projects and working with them as we go along. And I've got to say, those talks this week were great in showing that there are approaches to doing this and that people are really sincere about it and working on it. If you get a chance, well, at some point I'm hoping there was a great set of webinars from the SKA South Africa and Australia and Canada as part of the Casca webinar series. And those were amazing, just going into all the work they've done and all the talking with people in the local communities and going to the local schools and all this stuff. It's really amazing. It's a lot of hard work. It takes decades, but it's what we should be doing, and it is what we're doing now, which is great. Sorry, I'm looking at my notes to be sure I remember to say what I wanted to say. Okay, so those were sort of the overall context. A few scientific things. I'm not going to go over and try to summarize all the talks. You were all here for those. There were an awful lot of them. There were a lot of excellent summaries and reviews, and they all, I think, almost all the talks gave enough context that even I could understand them, which was awesome. It is such a broad field, and I'll get to that in the end. It's pretty amazing that that was the case. But there were a few things that just struck me going over them and talking to various people around here. First of all, this one's, I'd say, pretty obvious, but and this is another one that we've been saying for years. Oh yes, we're getting away from just doing single line science. You know, I'm an H1 observer, I do CO, or I do ammonia or whatever like that. But this is one of the first meetings where I felt like looking at the broad swath of science being covered, that this is really getting to be true. That we're realizing there are lots of different lines to look at, thing one. We're realizing that we can stack up lines of a given type, you know, like the radio recombination lines, and that you can choose your individual lines to do the stuff that you want, and the instrument is available to let you do that. I mean, that's another really critical thing. And the other thing I think we're really starting to use finally is these wide bandwidths at very high spectral resolution, which you get all the time now. So you do things like Faraday synthesis observations, you get things like even interferometric measurements at very high frequencies, which are confusion limited in the spectro, which is an amazing thing. I still don't feel that we're entirely in the regime of using all this vast information in an efficient and powerful way. There's so much in there that we're not really pulling out. I think we're just sort of picking at it, but that puts it at a very exciting time. I think there's going to be enormous amounts more to come. And this is also the first meeting, this may just be me, sorry Ninka. So I studied astronomy, I got a degree in astrophysics. It was very important that it was physics, right? And we've heard about astrochemistry, and previous meetings I often felt like that was a separate group, right? There were the chemists over there, and they didn't really know how to talk to us, and we didn't really know what to pick up from them. I got more of a feeling this time of, oh, that's why you do this. This is why it's interesting. This is why it's important. As I say, a lot of that's probably me, but it was really nice to see. Again, I think we're in the infancy there, but going in a good direction. Well, I hope you felt the same way. Another thing, thinking about wide frequency coverage, a theme that seemed to me to pop up over and over is, first of all, the need for wide frequencies, but also a lot of emphasis on opacity considerations. Some of that is the frequency range we're working at, right? That we're starting to get really interested in really small things where there tends to be lots of dust and other stuff blocking the way, so you've got to go to different transitions, different frequency ranges to get down there. And you also want to observe a wide range of frequencies to fully sample all the physics of an object. And again, that's something we've been saying for a long time that you really want to do. We're starting to get some of that done, and that will be one of the really exciting things when both these instruments come online in the next decade or so. Of course, I love variable sources, so I had to put this one in. Again, I sort of feel like about this, like I feel about chemistry, that seemed to me that we're starting to really integrate variability into standard astronomy. It's not so much an afterthought now, it's something that's built in at least near to the beginning, if not at the beginning. I mean, you organize your surveys to make sure this is true. I'm just showing random light curves and other things from various different talks. This came up in lots and lots of different fields, where you were interested in light curves, you were interested in time behavior, or you were interested in very rapid transients. The other thing that really struck me about this is that there are tons and tons of these, so there are lots of such sources, and it's really helpful if you get very fine sampling over a wide range of frequencies for a lot longer than you would have thought, which is an interesting problem to have. I don't think we've fully come to grips with that one, and that's going to be a bit of a challenge in operations, which I'll talk about in a bit. Of course, the other obvious one, which everyone says, but still definitely stood out, huge samples. Everyone wants more and more and more and more and more, and some of it is statistics, and some of it is divvying up into little bits and pieces that you can look at your friendly green star compared to this person's friendly cyan star, that kind of stuff. Some of it is looking out for evolution, so you're going to sit on things forever in really wide fields and go deep and deep and deep, so you can look at the full range of what the universe provides. And some of it is kissing a lot of frogs and hoping you find the one prince amongst all those, right? The special source that will show how everything works and reveal the secrets of the universe. So yeah, we're starting in on that. It's going to be a lot of work, and it poses its own challenges. There were also a bunch of what I call the long shots, Friday afternoon observations, when you're sitting around having tea and you don't really want to work, and you come up with, well, wouldn't it be cool if maybe we could detect this? And I put a bunch down there. This is sort of my list of personal favorites to sort of illustrate galactic center pulsars. Who hasn't tried to observe the galactic center looking for pulsars at high frequencies? I mean, it's just one of those things everyone does. It will be so great if we finally get a detection out of that. Similarly, supernovae 1A, looking for circumstellar material around there, exoplanet synchrotron emission, Zeeman broadening, which I think is a fantastic idea. I think it will be technically quite challenging, but it will be a lot of fun if it works. The chirality stuff, of course, SETI. There's a whole host of these. It's fun to see them coming around and be discussed. And hopefully, if we have enough of those, at least one of them will pay off and we'll have a Nobel Prize or two. So I'm going to switch gears now a bit and talk about the other topic of this meeting, operations of the instruments. I've been involved in some of these discussions and such. I wasn't expecting to learn enormous amounts, but I was pleasantly surprised. There was a lot of good stuff here and a lot of interesting things. So one thing is just to point out a bunch of common challenges to these two arrays, and also to some extent to the wideband upgrade for ALMA. One of these, of course, is they're big instruments and they're interferometers. Now, that itself is a huge set of standard things. Everyone in this room can say the word visibility and be sure that everyone else understands it, which is interesting and cool. I love interferometry, so I think that's great. But it also opens up a lot of potential synergies and opportunities to work together. And it means that if you know how to use one of these instruments at, say, 200 megahertz, you pretty much know a lot of what you need to know to work at 200 gigahertz, which, given the seamless frequency coverage and such, is really, I think that's a big plus. Again, the bandwidths and spectral capabilities of both instruments and of ALMA are very similar in that we're bringing home very large bandwidths, in some cases several octaves worth of bandwidth, and we're doing it at ridiculously high frequency resolution and with very tunable spectral capabilities. That's started to occur with some instruments. I think it came up a few times here talking about JVLA with things like Thor and such, but that's going to be very standard, right? Where you have lots and lots of zoom windows and you can play lots of clever games, and it's going to be a bit of a challenge for operations to make that visible and usable by the observer, right? Making it clear enough as to what you can do that people can play with it, and defining your observing modes sort of flexibly enough that you can take real advantage of that. Sadly, radio frequency interference is another consistent thing between the sites, not just at gigahertz anymore. Oh, good. Another one is the remote and widespread sites. That's interesting for aspects of maintenance and the like, but it's also interesting in terms of dealing with lots of different local communities, right? Making sure that they're all happy to have us in their backyard, that we're all working together. That's going to be a bit of a challenge. And similarly, the wide distribution of users is another thing I think we're pushing on more with this set of instruments than we have in the past. That's in terms of just geography, that the users are scattered all over the place, and you have to allow for someone in a small town, we'll use BC because we're in BC, in a small town in northern BC has to have equal access to the data to someone in Vancouver. We've said things about wouldn't that be nice before, but at this point, because the data sets are so huge and we all have the problem of being remote from the telescopes, there's no reason not to make this actually so, not to make it just as easy from one place to another, and there's a good reason to do that. Of course, the users, as demonstrated by this meeting, are also much more widely distributed in science. It used to be, say, 20, 30 years ago, you go to the VLA, you go to colloquia, and there would be AGNs, and there would be H1, and there would be, you know, if you were lucky, there was a radio recombination line every now and then, but, you know, ISM type stuff, and that was sort of it. And this has already completely been transformed with ALMA and with the new instruments so far, and it's going to go even more that way as we go forward, as we already see in this meeting. And the other aspect of that is that the radio savviness of those users is also going to change quite a bit. Again, that's already been changing with some of the emphasis on science-ready data products and on archival use and such, but I think we'll be trying to push that very broadly so that anyone at any wavelength can use things. You're not a radio astronomer, you're just an astronomer, and off you go. And that poses its own challenge, of course, because we still need the really technically competent, deep down interferometry nutcases, you know, the geeks of radio astronomy. We don't want to lose all those folks in a mass of machine learning. We still want those people around so that they can delve deep in the data and say, well, yes, actually there's a problem here, or gosh, you could do something terribly clever here. We're still going to need them, and it's going to be a bit of a challenge to make sure that we can still get them. Data rates, of course, one of the hugest challenges. I'm interested that the data rates anticipated for NGVLA, SKA, and I think the wideband ALMA are basically the same. And that number is, you know, sort of a petabyte a day, which is quite a concept. So, interesting times. Now that's all fine. You could have said all that 10 years ago, and yeah, sure. Right, Michael, we've heard this a dozen times. To me, one of the nice things I was hearing from this meeting, and what I heard, I've chatted with a lot of the ops people sort of on the side who are sitting there going, God, well, these astronomers never shut up and let us talk about something interesting. So they, of course, had lots and lots of side conversations that were interesting. And what I've heard is that those were very effective and helpful and have been very positive. One of the things, I forget, I've heard this from both ends, both from the NGVLA folks and from the SKA folks. There's remarkably good alignment of ops planning between the two projects, and that's in lots of different areas. That's in the workflow from proposal to observation and with how it's split up and how they think of it as working. Where does the user have access? Where do we keep them away? The idea of help desks, accounting for things like subarrays and time domain, these special modes of observation, the idea of how you ramp up capabilities and at what stage you open those up to the outside users. All that stuff seems to be, we seem to be sort of converging on the basic idea. There are lots of differences in acronyms and there are lots of differences in specifics, but overall, the striking thing is the similarity in that they can talk to each other and not think the other group is nuts, which is reassuring, I'd say. Right, big one, as I say, is data rates and data processing. Lots of good stuff at this meeting from that. There are a lot of similarities between the instruments that we're gonna have to be thinking about how we process the data way up front, both in terms of do we have the CPU power or whatever to actually do the processing, but also this idea that it's at proposal time, you're gonna say, this is the kind of data I want, so these are the kind of data products I'm gonna get. And both telescopes have, you can call them SRDPs, you can call them HLDPs, but anyhow, products, high-level things, not uncalibrated visibilities, is not gonna be the standard anymore. They're both perforce relying on a somewhat distributed network for computing. That was pretty obvious for SKA, which itself is so, the member countries are so widely distributed, and then the two telescopes are widely separated. It was interesting to hear in Sanjay's talk that that even in the US, with at least a facility mostly in one country, you're still thinking of having the network widespread, and they've still been playing these games of just trying to take the data to the compute power rather than the users. And the other thing that's similar is that there's gonna be a lot of extra project-based processing, which will be on the individual observer, sort of a different level than what we're used to in the past, where you have to doing your entire data reduction, but I anticipate a fair bit of analysis stuff that will be project-specific, and a lot of people wanting to go in and help define science-ready data products for their own stuff. Of course, the biggest difference between the two in this regard is still that NGVLA thinks it's going to store visibilities, and SKA doesn't even want to talk about that, except in small, restricted cases. Let's see. Oh, yes, challenges. So these were, again, things that came up in many different talks, so I was just pulling them out. One of them is radio interference. Sadly, we have heard about this, and we will continue to hear about this. I will say that we hear, when this topic comes up, we hear about the horrors of the future and all the things that are nasty and getting worse right now. And that's true. But there was a reason that these various sites were selected, and that we're building, and it's really helpful that we're building very big interferometers. The sites are selected to try and minimize this problem. They're not in downtown in big cities and the like. So there are games you can play with location. And for the SKA, they're as in the middle of nowhere as you can possibly get. So there is a lot of clean frequency space still. And of course, being interferometers, you have some advantages there. So yes, it's a problem. Yes, we have to work on it. Don't give up the ship and say you should become an X-ray astronomer. That would be sad. A couple tensions I just wanted to mention that seem to be coming up in various of the science talks, as well as the how to run the observatory talks, which is one of them is between this project-specific computing, where you say at the observe time, this is how I want to use the instrument, and these are the products I need, and so we do all that, and then we toss the data. That's sort of pushing against things like commensal use, which requires multiple pipelines running at once, and of course, you'll still propose those at observe time, I guess, and off you go, but it's going to be interesting to see exactly how that works out. And the other one is the big emphasis these days on archival use becomes more difficult if all you've got is the stuff that was specifically set up for that particular experiment. I'm not saying this isn't solvable, and I'm certainly not saying that the folks haven't thought about it, but it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out. And another one is one that I already mentioned, this tension between pre-planning everything and setting up data products and automating everything and machine learning, looking through your huge data sets and finding all your objects and classifying things automatically, versus making sure we still have super pundits around, getting these archival users, and not losing the really cool stuff which we weren't expecting. That's come up a number of times in this meeting as well, people saying, this is all the stuff that I know we'll do, which will be fantastic, but the really cool thing will be the things we didn't expect, which is certainly true. When the VLA was built, nobody knew that stars had radio emission, external stars that you might possibly detect, for instance. For that matter, they didn't know how to calibrate the telescope. So, lots of stuff to come. And another one just to call out that's come up several times, and that I think will be especially pressing for these huge extended instruments that are, I'm guessing, going to be as oversubscribed as ALMA is now, which I think is like 7-to-1 at the moment, is that subarrays, I still anticipate for these guys, could be a much bigger deal than we're used to thinking of them. Because there's such wide baselines that you're dealing with, because of special purpose observations, things like VLBI and variable sources. I can imagine people splitting up into tons of little subarrays and looking around for bright things and then jumping on the bright one with the entire array, that sort of stuff. And that'll be another fascinating one to schedule. Looking at Joan. So that's sort of the summary of this stuff, but I also had a couple, I'm gonna end with a couple comments on this particular conference. And why was this conference fun? I mean, my God, you look at this conference, oh look, it's gonna be an instrumental meeting talking about two instruments that don't exist. And it isn't the first meeting that's been talking about the science case for two instruments that don't exist. I mean, I went to an SKA conference, I think, around in the early 1990s. And the science cases, while much better fleshed out and all that good sort of stuff, they really haven't changed that much. So this could have been really boring. And the other problem was one that I've already mentioned. It's such a wide community. I mean, I don't know much of anything about what, say, 7/10 at least of the people in this room work on, right? So surely we're not going to talk to each other and have anything interesting to say. That's just, gods, how is that going to work? And, you look over the list of people and I'm saying, oh yeah, look, there are folks that I've been talking to for 20 years about these problems. And I'm one of them. You can identify some people in that picture. The gray hairs, some of them are still working on this stuff, and those that weren't quite so gray, some of them are still in this room. And that was, what, 15, 20 years ago now? But it's been great. I mean, geez, how the heck did that happen? So I think a lot of credit goes to you guys. The talks have been wonderful. I mean, I've been annoyed that I've had to go to every single talk. And that's annoying because there were so many people I wanted to talk to and hang out with and chat up that I hadn't seen in years, and all these new people who were doing great things that I'd never heard of that I wanted to talk with, but I had to go to all the talks, so I went to all the talks. But the talks were great. I mean, people did a really good job of setting the stage, giving the context, telling why I should care. There's so much just amazing data from all of these instruments. And the other thing is the audience for this has been great. I don't know how many times I heard the phrase, I mean, it was just this afternoon, I'm not an expert on this field, but I'm interested, I'm curious, and what about this? How does this connect? And that's fabulous. That is not a standard thing in conferences. So, fantastic. And the other thing is looking at this room and things. I'd say for the first time at one of these meetings, I feel like I'm looking around the room, and I really do believe that a lot of you are going to get to use these instruments, which is just amazing, right? And that's the happiest thing in the world. So, first of all, great job to the organizers to pick out these great speakers and get the right people here so that we had great discussions and lots of fun and lots of interactions, which was not a done deal at the beginning. So pat yourselves on the back. And again, yes, 5 days is far too short a time to spend with such excellent and admirable colleagues. It's really been fun. I wish I'd had more time to talk to all of you, and I really regret missing a lot of you, but it's been great. If you've had as much fun, as much a good time as I've had, it's been a great week. So Safe flights.